Hey everybody, my name is Philip. Earlier this year I decided to read the Bible from front to end, all the way through, and I really just wanted to capture here a little video journal of where I'm at, what I'm reading, and what I'm learning. Really the intention is to just learn more about the character of God and be able to find lessons that He has for me that I can live out in my life today. So I hope these videos are beneficial for you in some way, and I hope you enjoy them. Welcome back. We are in 2 Kings chapter 8 today, and this one tells the story about how God's providence is divine even in the midst of our brokenness. Have you ever felt broken? I have. But God's providence is divine. Check it out. So if you've followed along any of 2 Kings' journey with me, then you know that this is a time when prophets still walk the earth, kings rule with mixed motives, and God's hand can be seen guiding things in the background. At the beginning of chapter 8, we see the woman from Shunem. Shunem! You remember that lady, right? She was the lady that had built a house on top of her house as a place of rest for Elisha whenever he came into town. And because of her generosity, God had given her a son, and that son died. Elisha, with God's help, brought this child back to life, and once again, her connection with Elisha is about to change her life. So one day, in verse 1, Elisha tells her, "Take your family and move to some other place, for the Lord has called for a famine on Israel that will last for 7 years. He says, "Get out of here. There's about to be a famine. Go." She didn't hesitate. She packs up her stuff, gathers her family, and leaves to go live in the land of the Philistines. So 7 years pass. She returns. She finds her land has been taken by others. It was gone. Somebody else was profiting from her land now. But she was not forgotten. She went straight to the king to beg for her land back, and just at that moment, the king is talking with Gehazi. You remember Gehazi? He was Elisha's former servant. He was telling the king about all the amazing things that God had done, including the story of how God had given this woman a son and brought that son back to life. So as she enters, Gehazi says, "Hey, that's literally the woman I was just telling you about, and there's her son that I was just telling you about." So the king, he was so moved. Not only does he give her her land back, he gives her all the profits that land had during the time that she'd been gone. That's awesome. All right, and then in verse 7, the scene shifts over to Damascus. It's the capital of Syria. The king there, his name is Ben-Hadad. I think that's right. It's Ben-Hadad. Ben-Hadad. I believe that's how you say it. Don't quote me on that. So anyhow, Ben-Hadad is very sick. He heard that Elisha was in town, so he sends his trusted servant Hazael and says, "Ask Elisha if I will recover from my sickness." So Hazael goes and he asks Elijah, "Will the king recover from his sickness?" So in verse 10, Elisha says, "Go and tell him you will surely recover, but actually the Lord has shown me that he will surely die." So Elisha says, "Yes, he will recover, but he will surely die." It seems like an oxymoron. I don't know. But then, my favorite part here. Verse 11. Elisha stared at Hazael with a fixed gaze until Hazael became uneasy. Then Elisha started to weep. So Elisha tells him the king will recover, but he will surely die, and then he just stares at him until he becomes uncomfortable. Who would do such a thing? Sorry. So then Hazael says, "Why are you crying, Elisha?" Elisha replies in verse 12, "I know the terrible things that you will do to the people of Israel. You will burn their fortified cities, kill their young men with the sword, dash their little children to the ground, and rip open their pregnant women." Yikes. Hazael, he's shocked. He's like, "Am I a dog that I would do such things to people?" But soon he returned home. He told the king that he would recover, and the very next day he smothers the king with a wet cloth. Just like that, Hazael becomes the king. Hazael, killing me, buddy. You're killing me. All right, the end of this chapter talks about the downfall of a few kings. So we're back in Judah now. Jehoram, he's the son of Jehoshaphat. He's now the king. But he didn't follow God's ways the way that his father did. Instead, he chose to walk in the evil paths of Ahab. You remember Ahab, right? King Ahab and Jezebel, terrible people. In fact, Jehoram even married one of Ahab's daughters. See, he ruled with cruelty, and his reign was marked by rebellion and chaos. It was clear that when kings turned their back on God, their nation suffered. So when Jehoram dies, his son takes over as king, and sadly he also walks in wicked ways, and he's influenced by the house of Ahab. So this story ends with kings losing their way. Their nations are in turmoil, and the promise of judgment is looming over them like a dark cloud. So this chapter shows us a couple of different things here. I think the first one, in the first part of this chapter with the woman of Shunem, we see that God honors faithful obedience. Elisha told this woman who had once showed him hospitality to flee because of an oncoming famine. She obeys, and then she returns later, gets her land returned to her, so her land is restored, all because of the king's favor. The lesson here is that God does not forget the faithfulness of his people. When we obey his word, even when the outcome is uncertain, we place ourselves in his divine care. And he's not unjust, and he's not one to forget what we've done in his name. In the second part of this passage, verses 7 through 15, we see that God's word never fails. So Elisha prophesies to the rise of this Hazael character as king of Syria, along with the suffering that he's going to bring Israel. Hazael acts surprised, but ultimately he fulfills the very prophecy that was spoken. So the lesson here is God's word is true. God's word is sure. It doesn't return void when people act out of ambition or evil. God's purposes are never thwarted. God is not surprised. God is never thrown off guard by world events. He rules over them divinely. And in the last part of this chapter, we see the downfall of some kings. And I think this shows us that leadership without God leading the way is going to lead to ruin. So the chapter closes with a couple of kings who are doing evil in the sight of the Lord. They're walking rather in the ways of King Ahab. The lesson for us, I believe, is that when we as individuals reject God's ways, the result is often chaos and destruction. But even in those darkest moments, God still preserves a remnant and works towards redemption. So that's encouraging. I think this chapter reminds us that even though kingdoms rise and fall, God remains faithful through it all. I'm a poet and I didn't know it. No. God's word is true. His justice is sure. We might live in uncertain times, but we serve a God that is never uncertain. His providence watches over his people, and his purposes always prevail. So let's trust him, let's obey him, and let's remain faithful. Even when the world seems to be falling apart, God is divine through it all. Won't he do it?